is back. The Season 3 tier lists are back. Took a bit of time to grind the game and test some cards and so on. And we're going to go through and rank every single card. At least 95 overall pluses in Set 2 and Set 3 that you can use on your Diamond Dynasty squad right now. And we haven't done this in a bit, but I do want to refresh you all. These are my opinions and takes for Hall of Fame Ranked Seasons push. We have the new Ranked Season today, so if you want to get some of those new awards and make the best team, hopefully this list can help you decide which players you could use. And they're also based off of my experiences, what I hear from people. I can't use every single card in really good depth this year. So a part of the game is me just giving some suggestions that I think people like based off of what people have told me. So let's not waste any time. And let's go to the Show Zone here. And in case you don't know what Show Zone is a great platform where you could actually see these tier lists before I make videos. Maybe there are longer stretches like these last couple weeks where I don't update them. Make sure you check it out down below on the Show Zone link there. And I will have the link to this page here where you can see all of the lists in more visual form on your browser. Also, you can check out other things like merch and their Show Zone Pro subscription using code Scann, which supports me. It also gives you percentages off of those things if you want to try it out. It really is a great platform. I highly suggest it. But hopping into our tier list, you know how it goes. We got to go into catcher. And I made some adjustments on these lists. Every single list has one best at each position because a lot of times people may want to know which card I think is the go-to for anyone who has every single card. But of course, not everyone can get every single card. So I want to make it clear, these best cards are basically up to par with the S tier options in each position. But they're just the pick that I would suggest if you're able to get any single card in the game. Like if I were to make the best team ever, it would consist of these cards. So in Set 2, that guy was Joe Mauer, no doubt, with this top tier contact. Pretty solid power. And we still had some great options in Schwarber and Mike Napoli in the upper end. By the way, this is Cal Raleigh's card. For some reason, his card art doesn't show up. And to make this work, I did combine the D and the F tiers on these lists because honestly, an F tier was really tough to come up with. There weren't many cards I would say, no, don't use that card ever at that position. There were enough cards that were good enough to use, especially with this year's of content. So you know what? We're going with the there's no wrong answer approach here. And working your way up, obviously, I think the A tier and above would be the cards you really want to shoot for using if you're playing this game at that higher level. But honestly, if you're a lower difficulty person, you like your theme teams or is playing on All-Star regularly, I think most of, if not all of the cards on these lists will be definitely viable for you. Shifting over to Set 3, again, there aren't many cards at the lower end of the list that I really suggest not using, but we had some new content today to add some depth to the A tier, like Jorge Posada and Craig Biggio. I will say, some people may not love that I put Craig Biggio or Mike Piazza down here, because on paper, they're definitely S tier, but for me and my experience, I haven't loved them enough to be on par with these players. Like, Will Smith has some great pop and defense and solid speed. Someone like a Craig Biggio is fun if you like the high-speed catcher options, but being real, I don't think he's as much of like a necessity nowadays, because there are a lot of catchers who have good enough speed, plus some good hitting that is actually better than Biggio. But he's definitely a great use if you like your contact hitters. But in our top tier of cards, we have our 99 overall boys. I think the go-to guy is obviously Adley. I think everyone probably knows this at this point. Adley is the guy, switch hitting catcher, great overall attributes. For sure, he is the dude. First base in terms of Set 2 is interesting. Again, not many cards I wouldn't suggest using at all, but I really think it was a weaker position overall. There weren't that many really stacked options. You're maybe running someone in the secondary. I put Kyle Schwarber here as my pick for the best, but honestly, he'd be a go-to DH for a lot of people with his level of hitting. Even though you don't need to use him at catcher, I think that's the best spot for him. But you can put him at first. I think he's probably the guy. Like, David Ortiz and Frank Thomas are solid. But I don't know. I haven't really loved those cards. So in terms of Set 3, I think you should really go the route of Set 3 in terms of Season 3 cards. I think these are going to be the guys that give you good first base options. The lower tier of things here, the main guys I wouldn't suggest using are the guys with bad splits who aren't great hitters versus both sides. You want hitters who can crush both sides at first. They're going to be one of, if not your best hitters in your lineup. So we work our way up. You see the scale of hitters getting better. But at our top end, I think Vlad Jr. is my guy. I love Vlad Jr. And with how I'm doing these best players, I'm only selecting one player at each position. And I think he's the pick for first base on paper. Great contact, max clutch, max power. The defense is fine enough. He gets a bunch of quirks. And I feel like a lot of people love Vlad Jr.'s swing. So I'm going to say he's my pick over at first base. But as you see, this S tier is stacked with some really fun cards like Jock, Rafi Devers, Yandy Diaz, who I think are also going to be really good options. Second base in Season 2 was a little interesting. Again, not many great options here, especially on the upper end, though. I guess there were a bunch of solid, like, switch hitter guys, like Polanco. I would say Polanco is a tough one to keep out of the S. I just don't like his defense, but he's a great hitter. I think the pick was probably Brandon Crawford still. Great overall bat. He's a little slower, but he's best off at second, I feel, with that slower speed. So, in terms of second base, a little weak again in set 2. And I think there are some great options here in Season 3 that aren't too hard to get. This list is definitely a little weak. Not many great second base options in the game right now. But in terms of our players that we do have, actually, wait, I just realized I didn't add to this list. Let me do that real quick. Oh my. All right, no wonder there weren't many second base options because I didn't update the list properly. So, going into set 3, there are definitely some more options that I was just explaining before. But second base, you want some good hitting and hopefully some speed. You can also get away with a little worse defense in short. That's why I think some guys like a Trey Turner are really solid options, honestly. But I will say a lot of the guys lie in the S tier. There's a lot of good top tier options, but past that, not that much, and a lot of really good ones dependent on the way that you play. Maybe you're just hopping on, catching up, getting easier to obtain 99s. Maybe you're a grinder, getting some big boys like Jose Ramirez. I feel like J-Ram is my pick for second base, though. Switch hitter, great defense, solid speed, and one of the better hitters even at third base. And I think second base is a great spot for him because he's got that great defense, and the speed will work over at second base. Shortstop in set 2. Again, was a little weak, I feel like. Not many top tier shortstops. Some of them had some weaknesses. Like, a lot of them were great versus one side and not as much versus the other. The guy, I think, is David Wright, though. If you're going to use any set 2 card, if you're just getting on again, David Wright's that guy still over at shortstop. The defense is great. The overall hitting is still great. He fits the current, like, meta, facing a lot of left-handed starters. However, in terms of set 3, we've gotten a lot of great options, especially in the S tier. There's some really fun names that if you want to chat about that are there, like Barry Larkin, Bo Bichette, of course, Derek Jeter and Corey Seager is still viable, and even that new Michael Young that dropped. All very fun options if you don't have all the stubs in the world, but of course, the guy's Elly De La Cruz. He is the best shortstop in the game right now, and honestly, the best one I think we've had all year. I would really suggest him, and if you're someone who has him, you may even want to consider wildcarding him depending on how much you like him by the time Season 5 comes around, because at that point, you'll be ineligible to use. Third base in set 2, I decided to put Josh Donaldson here and David Wright over at short, because I do think Donaldson is great, and third base is a good spot for him with his level of fielding. He was a very fun, not too hard to get bat. Again, if you're trying to get back on track, he's still a very solid third base option. But if you see, I have the contact speedy guys lower at third because I want power and contact. I want to hit nukes over at third base. So if you see in set 2, I'm prioritizing some big bets. Third base in set 3, though, we had some fun ones, including some new World Series award players. The guy I'm talking about, of course, is none other than Rafael Devers. I really think this card is nuts. He's got top tier contact versus both sides, incredible power versus righties, and still very good versus left. The attribute split is a bit, I'd say, like George Brett, I feel like, last year, but I don't remember if George Brett had better power versus righties like to the level that Devers has. And that defense will be more than fine over at third base. A lot of people love Rafael Devers cards. If you're going to do anything, get a card in ranked, he might be the good safe pick, because I think in set 3, there might be some questions if you've been playing the game a bit at who you're running at third, especially for the future. Maybe it's J-Ram, maybe you run Castellanos at a secondary, maybe go for Vlad Jr. There's a lot of good options, but I feel like Devers could be a lockdown guy for a lot of people. The outfield. For the outfield, I picked 3 best outfielders because there are 3 outfielders on your team. And in terms of outfield, the defense and speed combination definitely starts to matter because you're going to be a good hitter. You better field your position in the outfield, especially if you're playing center field. You need that speed. So I obviously get more critical on those things here in the outfield. And the S tier has a lot of very good options. And I think a lot of people will find at least 1 or 2 in this S tier they like over a couple guys in the best tier. But I think Mantle and Hank are probably the 2 guys that are very safe guys to try and still use with the level of attributes they bring. The third outfielder is kind of tough here. A lot of people would find one in the S tier, but I went for Michael Brantley. He's a card a lot of people like. He's got a level of contact and power that I think is very good at all levels. And honestly, his fielding is good enough to throw in that left field spot. But I think a lot of people, if we were using set 2 cards, would be using players in that S tier. Very, very likely. But on to set 3. If you've been grinding the game, you know, especially today, there are some big boy outfielders we got. And I will say, especially with Extreme and stuff, there are some great 5-tool outfielder options that we'll honestly be able to use for a long time, including some great underrated ones in this A tier, like Anthony Santander's top now is a really sick option if you are looking for a card just below the best of the best that isn't too bad to get. But in our top tier part of the game, I know I'm going through the lower parts very quickly. These are the cards you definitely want to shoot for. Some people may go for an outfield if you've been grinding your TA for maybe like Corbin Carroll and then Jose Ramirez and then Ronald Acuna. That's a very acquirable outfield. Maybe you want to go for someone like a Mike Cameron or a Jackie Robbins that you're getting along the way. There's a lot of great options, but if I were to pick 3 to put in the outfield, I'd be putting Griffey in center, Bellinger in left, Acuna in right. You get 3 great defenders, 3 really good bats, and especially Acuna and Bellinger have a level of contact and power that I think would be great for every type of player, and especially with swings of theirs that are very favorable. I feel like those 2 are very solid options, and the beauty of Bellinger is if you have other outfielders you like, you can slide them over to first. But I think those would be 3 outfielders I would go for the most. In terms of new cards today, we had some fun guys like Duke Snider and Byron Buxton who are also very good options. But Bucks is a little weak in the contact versus right, which would be a problem for some, even though he is still very, very good. It's a slight weakness in comparison to other cards. And in terms of these guys in the S tier, some of them are a little worse defensively. Some of them are a little better defensively, but sacrifice a little bit of, say, power to make themselves work. I think you'll find some combination of 3 in this part of the game if you've been really grinding. I'd really suggest for those rank pushes, make sure you're getting that good defense, or at the very least, get that big speedy guy in the center field. If you have a bad defender, throw him in left or right, depending on the stadiums you like to play at. Starting pitching. I decided to choose 3 best for starting pitchers. This is an interesting one because I feel like getting a full rotation of 5 pitchers from one season that's really stacked is really tough. If you're just using cards from one season, you have a good 5, but at least 2 or 3 of those cards aren't going to be as good as some of the other top tier starters when you're combining seasons. So I highly suggest if you're someone who is playing this game all the time, get a couple cards from each set. I think Randy and Nolan, especially Randy Johnson's must use. But Nolan Ryan was worth trying if you do have him still. He's a little expensive, so I wouldn't suggest buying him at this point. And then Greg Maddux would be a very viable play on Hall of Fame. It might be a little tough on All-Star to use, so keep that in mind. And I think these would be the go-to I'd be using, while S are definitely very solid ones if you have pitch mixes and types of pitchers that you have a favoritism towards. Everyone seems to have the type of pitcher they like pitching with. Like, I like fast sliders, and I like my sinker cutters when they're available. Some people feel like they need outlier. So I think you'll find people in these upper tiers that you have preference for based on their attributes. But at this point, we're in Season 3, and there are some really beefy boy starting pitchers, especially in that best tier. On the lower end, these D and C tier either have players with too low of attributes or just not a good enough pitch mix that it could be really tough to pitch with on these higher difficulties. People on Hall of Fame and Legend are good enough hitters with, say, fastballs or those basic mixes. you kind of need a little bit of juice to be effective on these difficulties. So honestly, if you're grinding a game all the time, you could definitely get an S tier rotation at the very least. But I will say these A tier and B tier guys could be solid guys to start off with if you are starting from square one. There's a slew of options like Paul Skeens and Roy Halladay now, Rube Foster, Marcus Stroman. All these guys could be very viable rotation options, but I don't know if they're going to be effective enough for most players to make them must use like the guys in the best tier. So chances are you'd want to target the guys in the best if you're able to get them, then slot out the rest of your rotation with guys in the S. I've heard some volatility with some of the guys in the S where they could be very good, but also very bad from my experience or from what I've heard from people. So keep that in mind. They could be a mix of an experience for you. But if I'm going to pick any three, obviously John Donaldson is must use if you can get him. He is like the go-to meta guy still. Jacob deGrom has a new 99 chase pack card. He's very expensive, but if you got all the subs in the world, he's absolutely worth throwing in a rotation, even if he's just like a 4th or 5th pitcher for you. And an Al Leiter, I think, would be the pick for the 3rd best starter, mainly because he's got that sinker cutter mix that I know a lot of people like, and he's got 121 hits per 9, which is going to be very effective on all levels. And on Hall of Fame, he's going to have some really nice control. He's going to dot the zone a good bit, which I think a lot of people will like. You got a nice control guy, almost like a Maddox. You have a big velo guy like a Jacob deGrom. Then you kind of have your cheesy guy. It's like John Donaldson and Randy Johnson in your rotation options. So I would definitely try all these guys in the S and the best. You may have to dip down to that A tier, though, depending on your team, though. And there's some fun underrated guys like Senga and even Snell. I think Snell might be a little underrated in the sense that, you know, I've seen him pitch in some legend difficulty games, and he was kind of tough for people to hit from what I've seen. He's not going to be incredible, but, you know, there's a shot you pitch well with them. And then down here in our set 2 relief pitchers, I chose 4 relievers. I feel like that's a good sweet spot. Half of your bullpen, one side or the other. And I chose 2 righties, Kenley and Mo. Of course, they're the guys, 99 relievers with sinker cutter mixes. And then Aaron, Loop, and Aroldis Chapman are the go-to lefties. Again, Loop has that funky motion. Aroldis Chapman has the best overall mix for a lefty. And you'll likely be dabbling in your bullpen with a couple of these guys in the S. I decided to move Felix Bautista up. I will say he is really tough to hit. And I think these guys in the S could be very effective relievers for you if you haven't given them a try. But in terms of set 3, this is honestly a little tougher to come up with. If you are someone who's been playing and you have set 2 cards, you probably want to skew towards set 2. I feel like most of those guys are more effective than our set 3 cards. Because in our top end, you know, Billy Wagner is a very good reliever. It's definitely worth using. But past that, it's interesting. Like, Doval's good. Is he must use? I don't think so. Alexis Diaz has 3 pitches, but he could be good. And then Josh Hader, go-to lefty. But again, nothing too crazy on the pitch mix. If you were to skew anything, I think going for the best bunch here and then some S tier guys that you like here would be very viable right now. Because the S guys are pretty questionable here. I've heard good on Brock Stewart. I've heard good on, I've heard Joel Payamps is not bad, but I haven't tested him enough. But there is not as much bullpen depth here as you see. This is the one big strong point of set 2. A lot of great relief options, and I don't know if there's necessarily enough here in set 3 so far. But before I send you off, I want to show you my current God Squad. I'm running a very set 3 favored team here, because I do like to keep things progressive towards the future. This will be the team that I probably sweat with to start Season 3. Or, not start Season 3, but this next season of Ranked. I'm going to run Griffey in center. I have Acuna and Judge. You all know I love my Aaron Judge. Don't question it. He's been great for me. And honestly, I think this is the best infield. Cattell is a great card. I've had fun with him so far. Running J-Ram at short definitely isn't a long-term plan. I might throw a Jeter in there or mix it up with some other players we go here. And, yeah, I will say this team was very fun. And if you want to see me play some ranked to this team, I actually uploaded a video of my World Series game that I ended up playing with this team. And I got good old Satchel Paige here. I do some late night scans over here. I give some deep dives and tips to help you get better at the game and some, you know, live commentary gameplays. So make sure you sub to the channel if you want to see more of those. But that is it for my tier list here today. I appreciate you all watching. And we'll probably do one more before season 3 ends. I think we have about 3 weeks now before the season ends. So I'll make sure we wrap it up with set 2 so you can say goodbye and see where I lie with those cards in case you want to wild card any of them. But you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again on next one.